Today we're going to be looking at evaluating functions, and we're still going to be filling out those input and output tables. But the difference today is that sometimes maybe I'll give you the output and you have to find the input that matches. So kind of like going backwards today. Okay, so just a few quick reminders because remember, I think these are really important. I think we're going to need to know these in the future. Okay, so the first one is the definition of a function. This entire unit's about functions. And we know that the definition of a function is a relation where each input has exactly one output. All right, so if I'm talking about a function, we know right off the bat that each input is going to have exactly one output. Now, we're still working with our tables today, so just so we don't forget that our x's are our domain, the y's are our range, and all of these numbers over here on the x's, those are all of our inputs. Okay, there are x values, there are inputs, they're part of our domain. We have lots of different words for them. And so if those are our inputs, everything on the y side is always going to be our output. Okay, so those are our y's, our range, and our outputs. Okay, so there are a lot of pieces in that table. Okay, and we're going to use those a lot today. So far we've mostly just gone from plugging in our input and getting an output. Okay, so now we're going to look at what happens whenever I give you an output and we have to find the input that goes with it. Okay, so we're going to be going backwards a little bit. Still the same, we know that our x's are our inputs. And our y's, or the f of x's, those are where the outputs are. All right, so looking at our tables, okay, our tables are looking a little different today because now we're going to pretend like I gave you this information, okay? You knew that those were pieces in the table, so I want you to go ahead and fill those in now, okay? Fill in those pieces that I've given you. So you're going to put in -5, -3, -1, 3, and 4, okay? So that's what I want your table to look like. So we're going to use that information to fill in the rest of our table. Okay, so if I have this first one, remember this side is our inputs. So I have an input of a -5, so I'm going to put that into my function. So I'll have f of -5 equals 2 times -5 plus 1. Okay, so then we just have to simplify. You can put this in your calculator. Just make sure you're using your parentheses. So 2 times -5 is going to give me -10 plus 1. And -10 plus 1 gives me -9. So you should get a -9 for this output. We're going to do the same thing with the -3. We're going to plug that one in. So now I have f of -3 is equal to 2 times -3 plus 1. Well, 2 times -3 gives me -6 plus 1. -6 plus 1 gives me -5. So we're going to have a -5 right here. Now, looking at this, okay, those are pretty much just what we did yesterday, okay? And we know that these are our coordinate points, -5, -9, and -3, -5. But now on this one, this next one, it's different because now you're given a -1 for an output. Now we know that our f of x, or our output, okay, is a -1, but we have to find the input to go with it. So what we do is we know that f of x equals -1. So for this entire function, we're going to get rid of the f of x. Okay, so instead of f of x, now we know that that's equal to -1. So I'll have -1 equals 2x plus 1. So we have to find the x, or we have to find the input that goes with it. Okay, so since we're looking for the -1, or we have the -1, we have to find the input that goes with it. Okay, so we're just going to solve for x. Well, the first thing that we have to get rid of is this 1 right here. So we're going to subtract 1 from both sides. -1 minus 1 will give me -2. equals 2x. Those just canceled each other out. Now we're going to divide out the 2. The 2's cancel. Negative 2 divided by 2 gives me negative 1 is equal to x. This is my input. Okay, so I went backwards. I had to find the x that went with that. So now I know that my input is also going to be negative 1. Okay, now, if you need to rewatch that, please do. Okay, we're going to try this again with 3. Okay, again, we are given an output. Okay, this is an output, so we cannot plug it in for x. So what we have to do is we have to get rid of this f of x right here. And instead, now we'll have 3 is equal to 2x plus 1. Okay, so then we have to find the input that goes with it. Okay, so we're going to solve for x. We're going to subtract 1 from both sides. Those go away. 3 minus 1 gives me 2 is equal to 2x. Well, that 2 is not wanting to work, is it? There we go. And then we need to divide out the 2. And we'll get x is equal to 1. So this will be a 1 right here. So those will both be points. -1, -1, and 1, 3. All right, and then the last one, now we're back to getting an input. So now we're back to normal. Okay, so we're going to take that 4, plug it into the function. Okay, so now I'll have f of 4 is equal to 2 times 4 plus 1. Well, 2 times 4 gives me 8 plus 1, which gives me 9. So I'll have an output of a 9. Okay, so that's the point for 9. All right. Looking at example 2, we're going to do the same way. Okay, remember, it looks like a lot of work, but you have that calculator to help you through a lot of those problems. Okay, so example 2, we have f of x equals negative x minus 4. Again, I've given you the table filled out, so go ahead and fill in that table. Okay, fill it in with the -5, -3, this -5, 2, and 4. So go ahead and get that filled out. Okay, so now that your table looks like mine, okay, we are just going to be plugging in all of our inputs. So I want you to go ahead and plug in the -5, -3, and the 2 and the 4. So I want you to go ahead and plug all those in and find the outputs and write the coordinate points that go with those. Okay, so I want you to go ahead and do that now. And then I'm going to go through and you can check your work. All right, so I hope you took the time to go through and plug all those pieces in. Our first input that we have is at -5. So I'll have f of -5 is equal to negative, and then we plug in that -5. So -5 minus 4. Well, negative and a negative and make that a +5 minus 4, which +5 minus 4 gives me 1. Now you could have also plugged all that into the calculator and gotten a 1 right there. For the point, -5, 1. Do the same thing for -3. Okay, we'll have negative and then -3 minus 4. Well, the negatives make that a +3 minus 4 gives me a -1. So I have an output of a -1. The next one that we have is the 2. So we're going to plug in the 2. So I'll have f of 2 equals negative times the 2 minus 4. Well, that just makes -2 minus 4 gives me -6. And then the last one, plugging in the 4, I'll have f of 4 equals negative times 4 minus 4. Well, -4 minus 4 gives me a -8. Now, we got all of our outputs that went with our inputs, but we have this one pesky little output. Okay, since we have to deal with this output, okay, this is where we get rid of the entire f of x. Okay, and instead of an f of x, now we have -5 equals, just so I can help organize my work a little bit, put this in a box. And that's going to equal negative x minus 4. Okay, so we have to find the input that went with that output. Okay, so now we have to solve for the x. So to do that, I'm going to add 4 to both sides, because to get rid of a minus 4, we have to add it. Those go away. Negative 5 plus 4 gives me negative 1 is equal to negative x. There's this negative 1 in front of the x, so to get rid of that, I'm going to divide it out of both sides. That goes away. Negative 1 divided by negative 1 gives me positive 1 equals x. So my input would have been a positive 1 for the point of 1, negative 5. This would have been the point 2, negative 6, and the point 4, negative 8. All right. Once you get that down, I want you to go ahead and go to the next page. We've got one more of these wonderful tables to look at. All right, so go ahead and fill out the table so it looks like mine. We've got negative 5, 14, 6, 0, and 1. Okay, so I want you to take a few seconds, go ahead, or a minute, and try this one on your own, and then you can check your work with mine when you're finished. All right, so hopefully it took a few seconds to go through, or minutes, and go through and actually work that problem out. Okay, so for the first one, we were given an input of negative 5, so here's the work for that. Okay, we plug that in and we got an output of 22. Okay, my other inputs were 0 and 1, so I worked those out right here. We got an output of 2 and an output of negative 2. Now, the outputs that were received were 14 and 16, so I plugged 14 in right here, solved that, and got 3 for an answer. And then I also did the same thing with 6, plugged that in, solved that, and got negative 1. All right, so if you have questions about that, please make sure you're writing those down so you can ask me those in a moment. All right, so now go on to our last few problems. They're a little bit of review, okay, for your quiz tomorrow, because we will be taking that quiz. Okay, we're just, for this one, remembering some notation. Okay, so this says evaluate the function f of x equals 3x minus 1 at each of the following outputs. Well, this should all say following inputs. My bad. Okay, so here we have 3. That's going to be my input. So this is going to be equal to, I just bring down my function, 3 times, instead of an x, it becomes a 3 minus 1. So 3 times 3 gives me 9, minus 1 will give me an 8. So my final answer will be 3, 8. We're going to do the same thing with the negative 1. So I'll have 3 times negative 1 minus 1. Well, 3 times negative 1 gives me negative 3 minus 1, which gives me negative 4. So I'll have negative 1, negative 4 for my final answer for that one. And then the last one you have is 1/2. So now we're going to plug in that wonderful fraction. So I'll have 3 times 1/2 minus 1. Well, half of 3 is 1.5 minus 1, which will give me 0.5 or 1/2. Haha, so they're both 1/2. Okay, so that'll give me the point 1/2, 1/2. That's fun. I didn't mean to do that. That was definitely on accident. That's great. Alrighty, so last one, looking at number 5. Okay, I want you to graph the following points, and then you can check your work with mine when you're finished. So go ahead and try and graph those for me now. All right, so I hope you tried to graph these. The first one we had was negative 5, 2. Okay, so if I go to negative 5 up to 2, that's from right here. So that was point A. Make sure you're fixing these if you did not graph them correctly. Then I'll have 0, negative 3. So 0 down to negative 3. 1, 2. Negative 1, 0. That's going to be point D. So back to negative 1, and then I don't go up or down. And then 5, 4. So over to 5, up to 4. And that's going to be E. All right. So please make sure you're writing down if you have any questions, and then you can move on to your homework for today.